Hi, I'm Avalon Starlight, and you are listening to the Rebel Unicorns podcast. This season, we are diving deep into what being an empath in business actually looks like. Listen each week as I share tips and tricks to master your empath energy, as well as sharing incredible guests who have created successful businesses by claiming their empath title. Are you ready? Let's get our rebel on. Hello, Rebel Unicorns. I am so excited about this episode of the Empaths in Business podcast that we're talking about. Today's guest and I think are going to have a different spin than any of the other guests you've heard so far. This guest is somebody that, honestly, I respect so deeply the way that they look at the world and how they see through a very particular lens of clarity and focus that I've never experienced in any other human. So when this person is speaking to me, it's like I am paying attention. I'm so grateful to our friendship. I'm so grateful that the universe brought us together. And I'm so excited to introduce you to Céline Williams. Hi, Celine.
Hi, that was the nicest intro anyone has ever given me. Thank you.
I like the intro from the heart.
I appreciate that. I think it's rare, right? Like often when you're doing something like this, it's a very much let me read your formal bio of the things, and I do it, right? Like let me read this. That was like very warm and fuzzy. I love you. Thank you very much.
I truly do believe this. Like that's one of your superpowers in your gift is that like you see right to this, like you cut through the shit. Like you just are like, fuck that, all that nonsense on both sides. Let's just get to what's important here. And I want to highlight that. And I want to get into this because it's something we were talking about before. But the first thing I want to ask you, do you know your Rebel Unicorn house?
I do. It's Catalyst.
Does that mean something to you?
Like, I mean, I know what the word catalyst. Do you mean in terms of the Rebel Unicorn houses, or do you want me to just like espouse, give me my thoughts on Catalyst? I mean, I think that I don't remember all the details of what was summed it up, but it definitely resonated because it's about like change and like big impact, leading lots of people, impacting a lot of people, and that's definitely something that is it almost feels like societal change to me, right? Like, how do you change the fabric of society in a way where people are able to live the kind of life that they're meant to live? And that's something that very much drives me. So that's what it means to me.
I love that because one of the things that, because my whole model is based on energy, right? A catalyst is here to change the vibrational frequency of leadership. Right. And so when you're changing that, you are changing the world. You are making the global impact through this very definitive space, right? Like you can't find a catalyst unicorn doing one-on-one readings with people. That's not what a catalyst does. Did you find that funny? Why, Celine?
I mean, listen, I'll tell you why I find it funny. For me, I will not speak for anyone else who might be doing one-on-one readings for people as an example. Is that I resonate with that because I have done a lot of one-on-one coaching over the years, and the game changer for me just over like a year and a half ago was starting to work with still doing one-on-one coaching, but in a team setting. So it's both. It's not just one-on-one where it's just that person. It's actually influencing the whole team and thus a whole company. And I was like, oh, because I like one-on-one coaching, but I'm like, it never gets to where the impact that I want it to have. And I'm like, oh, this. Okay, I get it now. Okay.
So in what way do you do that? Can you just share a little bit about your work?
Yeah, so I always say that I do leadership development and culture design work. So a piece of that is executive coaching. I have some folks that work with me that do coaching at different levels of leadership as well in organizations. But I'm really driven by, so I think the best way I can sum it up is it is really important to me that everyone feels like they can show up wholly and completely as themselves in whatever that moment is, in the recognition that it's not always going to be perfect or the same, and that one day is going to be different than the other. But in that moment, that they are confident in showing up that way. and by doing so create that space for other people as well. And so business company cultures, whether it's a small company or a big company, are really important to me because we spend most of our time at work, right? Like we spend a good chunk of even as an entrepreneur, we can say that I only work 4 hours a week. That's not real because you're thinking about work. So your energy is still going into your work and you're still there in some way, shape, or form. It's a load of bullshit, pardon my French, when people say that. So if we're recognizing that that work takes up a big piece of what we do, because for a lot of us it's a passion and a purpose, then how do we create spaces, big or small, that enable everyone to be wholly and completely themselves in those spaces?
I mean, I don't know what you're talking about. I've never had trouble falling asleep at night because my business was running through my head. Come on.
Right. Well, this is I very much respect in some ways the work that people like Tim Ferriss have done in terms of saying, hey, there's other ways to work. I get, yes, there are other ways to work. And any entrepreneur who tells you they're only working 2 hours a day is lying. They are lying.
It's true.
It's not real.
And I'm going to break this down even further because I think that this is a misconception that I also want to talk about. And I feel like we're going to be talking about the misconceptions of being an empath. I think this is just the way that our conversation is going to go a little bit. I was like, I know that this one's going to be different than all the rest of them.
Yeah.
Is this sense of like, when they're saying that, they're most likely saying, I only log into Zoom for 2 hours a day.
Right.
But that doesn't include the emails I'm writing or the planning and the prep that I'm doing or the research or whatever other form that work is taking.
Yes. 100%.
You're cataloging as Zoom hours. I do 4 hours a week of Zoom. That's what you do.
It's so funny because I think, and I recognize that not everyone maybe feels as attached to their work as I do or you do or some people do. I think that's also an empath thing quite often, is when we find something that we love doing, we're really connected to it and we're really in it. So I might not be working, but the article I'm reading is about leadership because I'm interested in leadership. The article I'm reading or the book I'm reading is about how to reframe our assumptions because I'm interested in it. But you know what? That's all part of my work and that's part of my business. It's all connected. So it's not 2 hours, like it's not real. And yeah, you can have that lens and say, well, that's different. But it's all connected and it does everyone who is trying to create their dream life or dream position or dream job or whatever the case is a disservice by not acknowledging that it is connected.
I agree. I want to bring this back because you did bring up the word empath, and I want to, because it's something that I think most people don't align with yet, or they may not know that they are, or that there's just like, there's a misconception about the word empath as a term. Like people almost like, it's like the word witch. They're like, I'm not an empath.
Yeah.
Like no, it's dirty. It's a dirty word. So can you give a little bit of your history? Like, did you always know? Was it something you found out? And what was the transition for you through it?
Oh boy. So as you know, I had a very unique upbringing because of the nature of who my mother was. So my mother was a healer, and anything that one would consider woo nowadays, that kind of language of woo, which I hate, but it's out there. My mother was into in 1980 when no one else knew what the hell she was talking about. And that was just normal in our house. So, I went to my first meditation class when I was 5 years old. I was doing it regularly with her when I was 6 years old. I had imaginary friends that I still remember the names of them and what they looked like, because my mother was never like, that's a weird thing. My mother was like, they're your spirit guides. They're your imaginary friends. That's fine. Go play with your friends. No big deal. It wasn't treated as a thing to grow out of or like a weird thing. So I say all of that because while I didn't necessarily know the language of empaths specifically, it was never seen as a strange thing that I was hyper aware of the feelings of people around me and what they were going through and what was happening. It was just trusted by my mother. It wasn't the language, but it was just like, okay, yeah, that's a thing. I think when I became really aware of it when I was a teenager, and I realized that it wasn't something that everyone experienced in the way that I experienced it, because it had been so accepted and normal at home. That's when I was like, I do not know what this is and I don't want this. Which was a really great time to step into the world of how can I alter my reality to make it so I don't have to deal with these things, which I merrily did when I was a teenager, which is great. I mean, I have lots of great stories from that. And it was a lot of it was to be like, I don't want to feel this different because it felt different.
So are we
Um,
talking like numbing yourself with alcohol, like that kind of
Totally.
different? Okay.
Yeah.
I just want
Yeah.
to, for those that are listening, because I
Yeah.
do share that part of my story too, that by the time I was like 16, I was drinking and doing drugs because I just didn't want to feel everybody else's shit anymore.
Yep. 100%. I started, I mean, I wish I could say that this was a lie, but I started drinking when I was 13 and experimenting with drugs when I was 14. And by the time I was 16, it was like every weekend, Thursday, Friday, Saturday was like, where's the party?
Mhm.
And what, and I'm really lucky that I don't have an addictive personality. So once I recognized it in my early 20s, I was like, oh, I'm just going to stop doing it. And I did. And I'm super, like, I recognize how fortunate I am because not everyone can do that.
Mhm.
But it certainly was, I was doing it to numb. So I didn't have to feel everyone's feelings. And I didn't have to feel my own feelings either, quite frankly, because teenagers,
Yeah.
that was a real thing. Uh, just going to call it. I had a lot of feelings. All the other teenagers around me had a lot of feelings. It was not fun.
Yeah. It was like a feelings cocktail party and
Oh,
like,
God.
you were the shaker making
Yes.
the tasty cocktails. I get you. I feel
Not
you.
good. So yeah, so I really kind of started exploring it more. Again, I don't know that I had the language at the time, but like in my mid 20s was when I was like, so what is this and what does this mean and how can I use it for good? Also,
Spider-Man.
recognize.
I always think of Spider-Man,
Yeah.
use this for good and not evil.
Well, and I was going to say, and part of it was also recognizing at a certain point that I could use it for evil. Like you can use it to manipulate people.
Totally.
That's a real thing. And I definitely dabbled in that because I didn't know. And I was like, wait, I can get stuff out of this. Thankfully, that doesn't drive me anymore, but
How
that
are
was real.
you open to sharing that? Because I feel like we're, like I said, I would like to cover the dark side of being an
Yeah.
empath. And I think that this is a conversation to have with somebody else because I can talk about it, but for others to hear the experiences, because we do have the capacity as an empath, like I've explained this. It's not just about bringing in emotion, but we have the capacity to take our emotions like little hooks,
Oh,
go,
yeah.
get them right in people as well. And unconsciously we can do it. If we're
Yes.
again an empath who has not claimed that they are an energy worker, you can do it unconsciously and cause harm in a way.
And I think, and I think that that is, I love the way that you put that because I think a lot of it is very unconscious at the beginning. And then it becomes a, oh, I'm getting my way and I like getting my way. And you don't necessarily connect the dots as to why you're getting your way because it is that you're putting your emotions out and you're bringing people into your sphere of influence, if you like. It becomes you are influencing them way more than they can influence you because you have that ability to lean into your feelings in that way and to use them in that way.
Yeah.
And I certainly did it with friendships. I certainly did it with, if friendships weren't going the way, if people weren't doing what I wanted them to be doing in terms of friendships, I could make them feel a certain way about me or feel, um, you know, exaggerated, like if I was feeling a little bit hurt, I could make them feel so guilty for how hurt I was feeling without ever having to say, hey, you hurt my feelings and let's talk about this, that they would come back 100 times over to feel better about that guilt because of how I could project that I feel hurt and amplify it on them.
It's a great word to use. I think that that's something that I haven't heard explained yet in the series, is that we are amplifiers
Yep.
of emotions.
Yep. And I think the flip side also happens until you learn to protect yourself or filter yourself from people. can very easily step into feeling amplifications of their emotions, right?
Yep.
If they are when people, so I talk about this with grief quite often because both of my parents are dead now. And so when you go through grief, it's like waves, right? It's not static. Grief is not that's not real. It is waves coming and going, right? And when there's a big wave and it takes you over, it feels like you have no control inside of it. And I think that emotions in general can be like that for a lot of people, not for everyone, but especially if you're not in a place where you are mindful of your emotions and you know how to work with them until that point, they can feel like a lot. So if someone is feeling very overwhelmed in the moment and you're an empath, that is amplified for you 10 times if you don't know how to protect yourself against it, because you don't know how to to quiet that down or to put it in a perspective or to realize sometimes that it's someone else's emotion.
And so when you were in that place of the dark arts,
Mm. Yes. Yep. The dark arts. I like it.
what was it that kind of brought you back to center or helped you realize that or had you realized that you were unconsciously or consciously at that point able to shift or create different emotions or amplified emotions in others? Like, what was it that you were like, oh my God, I think I'm enhancing this, or I'm doing this myself?
I don't know that there was a specific incident. I think there was a series of circumstances with different friends of mine that went sideways in ways that I was not expecting. So, a really easy example. There was a person that I knew. This is not a romantic any sort of romantic way. This was a friend who, in essence, ended up stalking me because they had some mental health issues that I was not aware of, and what I was putting out and creating amplified that in a way that got very dangerous and uncomfortable. So things like that, I mean, that's the extreme version of it, but I lost, for good chunks of time, friends that to this day mean the world to me, that I lost because of stuff that I was doing and putting out and what I was creating, not because they had done anything or there was this like big fight or this big rift. It was 100% these emotions. And so it was over, maybe a 3-year period total. There were enough of these sorts of circumstances that it became and to be fair, I was also introduced to the concept of emotional intelligence at that point. And I was like, oh, this is interesting. And exploring emotions in general is what led me to be like, oh, I do this thing with emotions, don't I? Yeah, got it.
Is that when you claimed being an empath? Like, you actually, the term came through for you?
I think the term probably came through, I would say 10 or 12 years ago. So a little bit after that, but not long after that.
And was it, so for me, like, I felt like kind of like a loose cannon energetically until I actually knew that there was this group of humans that were energy workers who then could bring in energy and also could project energy, and that they were called empaths. And once you had this information, then you could then be almost like the orchestrator of this new realm.
Yeah.
Was it that for you? Like, it made sense. It was like, all of a sudden things made sense for me. Or was it like, oh yeah, no, of course I am, and you just continued on?
So it definitely, so I have an interesting relationship with the word empath, and I love that you're bringing this up because I'm sure this is going to go ways that your other conversations don't go. I recognize when I understood or came across, and it was like probably on one of these books that's on my shelf back here that came from my mom, is where it first sort of connected. I guarantee it's somewhere in here. But when I first came across it, I was like, oh, this makes so much sense. Like there was like I got it. And I was like, this doesn't work for the work that I want to do. This doesn't work for, the leaders I want to work with. This doesn't work in the core. I can't be an empath and do this kind of work. That, like, these two things don't coexist. This is too woo, spiritual, you know, whatever side of things. And I want to, I don't know the word. And like, I want to be doing stuff that is like businessy, and like, I couldn't bridge that gap in when I first came across it. So it was a really interesting, this resonates, and I know this is who I am, and I can't claim it because then I can't be a person who is taken seriously in the world.
I'm going to categorize everything over here that you keep saying woo to as magical.
Sure, you can use whatever word you want. My mother would have said spiritual, and she would hate that I was saying woo.
I know, I hate that word so much.
Yeah,
but I can feel that word is what the corporate world categorizes this stuff as.
Correct. Yeah.
Right? Because it is outside of the rational mind.
Mm-hmm.
It has no logic and does not belong in a logical, analytical world of business.
Well, and here's the really funny thing is I have never, nor do I now, play in the logical, analytical world of business. That's not, I don't work with companies who think that way or approach things that way. Like, yes, there's obviously numbers and logic but that's not their driving factor, right? Like, that's not the be all end all. I work with companies and leaders who are vulnerable and open and cry in front of their people and share their personal like, I don't even work like, that's the best part of it, is like, now I have found that balance, but at that time I couldn't see it.
So then what does that look like? Because I'm just curious to be like, yeah, oh great, now I'm this thing, it's an empath, and I know it's this thing, and I don't want it, so I'm going to try and not be it. What does that
No. So that's the fun part, is that I was never like, I am not going to be it. I was like, I'm just going to not talk about this. I know this is real, and I'm going to keep doing stuff and working on it and working with people on it and having the conversations with, like, my mom's best friend who's a shaman, right? And her other best friend is a medium. Like, I'm going to have those conversations and lean into it and explore what this is, but I'm just not going to talk about it if it's not with those people.
So the separated life. Like, where
Exactly.
you're in two different lanes at the same time, and you're trying to coexist and carry two different types of being, almost.
Yes.
Like,
yep.
Separation, duality.
Yep, exactly.
And how did that go for you?
I mean, it worked to a point. It got me started. And then at a certain point, it did not work anymore. Listen, it's not that it didn't work. It's that it was not as effective as it could have been. Right? So I probably could have kept doing that for a long period of time, and it would have been okay. And it would have been separate, and that's fine. And I didn't love it. And it's not who I am ultimately.
So can I ask you a question? Curiosity question?
Ask me any question.
Because you know shit. Like, you're really good, like I said, at like seeing what somebody is actually thinking or feeling, and being able to bring their attention to it. Did anyone not kind of figure it out for, like, were they not like, you have something, like, what makes you so capable at this kind of stuff? Like, were you not getting called out on it anyway?
Yeah, and I still do. And people don't have the language for it necessarily. So one of the things that the people that I work with say quite often inside conversations is like, how, I'm assuming I can swear on your podcast. I'm gonna swear. So they're like, how the fuck did you do that? How the fuck could you tell that? Like, how do you know that that's the thing that's driving them? You were right on. Like, how is that possible? And so they notice the outcome of it, but they don't understand what drives it. And I can use the language of empath, and that has such different meanings for different people. Some people are like, yeah, I totally get it. It's like intuitive. I can say this is intuition. And for some people, they're like, oh, that's a dirty word. And for other people, oh yeah, it's like a gut feeling. That's cool, right? And then some people are like, intuitive is psychic. There's the how it lands is so, it's a range. So generally people are so fascinated by the result of it that they don't care, or it's not that they don't care, but they're not as concerned about understanding where it came from.
You're like the secret weapon on their team that they can't explain.
I mean, thank you. I'll take that for sure. I'll take that for sure. But I mean, that happens all the time. And people, like, I have a leader who says this all the time, that I'm the person that he sends all his people to unfuck their heads. Because he's like, I don't know how you do it, but like, they spend half an hour with you and they're like a whole different person.
Was it always a thing too as a kid? Like people would always say, like, I just, every time I'm around you, I just feel so good, or I feel different, or I feel
Yes and no.
better.
Yes and no. So, not necessarily better. I have always had people always felt very seen with me. That was the thing. Like, you really get me has been a thing that people have said like so many times in my life. You really get me. I feel like you really get it. The flip side of that is that, and this has also happened a lot, is when I and when something, and this is where it becomes that like empath intuition, I can't tell you what it is, but when I don't trust you, or when I don't like you, or when I'm put off by something, it's like I can't explain it, and it is deep, and you will also know that. So
That's
it's like,
so
bask in the sun or do not. Like, you're in darkness.
right. It's so funny because as before you said this, literally all I can hear is my head. Ask Celine about being an empath as being a human lie detector.
Yes, 100%. That is exactly what it is for me.
It's it's not just for you.
Yeah.
Like it's this thing that when somebody is being incongruent or not in their highest self or not in a space of truth, we can feel that as much as you can feel that you're not being honest with us. And it's funny because when my son was little, I would always know when he was lying, and I didn't know that I could actually know that he was lying. Like
Yeah.
I just knew that he was lying and I didn't know how. And I used to say to him, when you lie, because he's like, how do you know I'm lying? And I'm like, well, when you lie, your ears turn red. And then he would cover his ears when he was lying.
Yeah.
So
Of
it's really,
course.
and then it made it really obvious. But, you know, I want to ask you another question. What do you think the misconceptions of being an empath are?
Ooh. Okay. Can I go back to something you said before I answer that question? Because I don't want to skip over this because, yes, being an empath is absolutely being a human lie detector, often without proof, which is a really hard thing to do when you're trying to tell someone like, hey, be careful of something, and they don't get it because they don't see it, and they're like, well, that's not what I'm seeing right now. That has been I mean, I've lost friends over things like that, so that is the downside. But I will also say this: being an empath, at least for me, also means I am a phenomenal liar because I can manipulate your emotions. I'm not even kidding you. There were, up until my mom died, we would talk about things that, like, I lied my face off as a child and teenager, and she had and my mother was highly intuitive, no idea, because I manipulated her emotions around it. And I'm so convincing when I want to be. That was a big turning point for me when I realized, like, oh, no one is ever going to call me out on a lie. I don't want to be the person that lies just because I can.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if that is consistent with other empaths, but that was a big turning point for me in terms of recognizing the impact I want to have on other people as an empath.
I think that this is very, very powerful because I can now think back to my childhood as well. And I can't give the examples of like being, but I knew I would know, and it traveled through my entire life. I can tell, I can convince anyone I'm okay,
Yep.
right? Like I can tell anyone that things are golden and I'm fine, and be starving for them to see through it, mind
Yep.
you, sometimes being like, can you just see how hurt
Yes.
I am inside? Like, why can't
Yes.
you feel me right now? And yet they believe every word that I'm saying because of this capacity that when I project that they're going to be like, yep, she's
Yep.
fine, then
Yes.
that's it.
Yes. Yep.
And
That's
so for me, it didn't manifest in that same sense. It was the same, that was like, don't see me, but see how hurt I am. Can you not feel me?
Yeah.
So it was devastating.
Yeah. I also have a lot of that. And I still struggle with that sometimes because I'm a human and I still struggle with things like because that's why. But definitely where it's like, if I'm not careful about being very intentional about how I answer things or you know, showing up present in a moment, I can very much default in, and I can convince anyone that things are the way I think they, or the things are the way I'm saying they are, even if it's not true, or I don't feel that way, or, and then I don't feel seen. And I'm like, I just did that to myself. Like, what is wrong with you, brain? Why are you doing that? So, when people ask me how I am, I'm actually I used to work with a woman. I was telling the story yesterday, funny enough. I used to work with a woman who, when you asked her how she was like, I am fantastic. I'm having a wonderful day. No matter what day it was, that was her answer. And I hated it because it's so inauthentic. And also as an empath, I could always feel through it. And I was like, oh, stop doing that. And because of that, I am very intentional. If someone says, how are you? I will pause and be like, here's the thing that's happening right now. And I try and stay in the moment. So I'm not ever at that point where I'm like, just see me because I've misrepresented something intentionally or unintentionally.
Yeah. And I think that this is the work that has been prevalent in the last few years with me. It's really about vulnerability.
Yes.
Like if we're going to sum down to a word, it's like being seen is vulnerable, and being seen as an emotional being seen as a vulnerable is one term, but in your vulnerability, like that we don't have it together all the time, or there are experiences in the life where we are confused, or we've made a mistake, or we have to apologize for something. I apologized in a car this morning to Jeff because I can control situations as an empath as well. So I can and amplify that, right?
Yes.
So if I want something my way, even in a marriage, it's that sense of they can lose their identities in the strength of our capacity. And so my apology was like, I know I made it hard for you to use your voice to be heard because I could just smother.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. And I think it's important, not to make it dark, but I think it's important for empaths and people who are exploring this to be aware that for a lot of people, and I'm sure it's not everyone's different, so there's a spectrum for all things, but that this is a real thing that I don't think we talk about. It's certainly not something I read about or heard a lot about when I was starting to research and talk about empaths or talk with people. Like, it was my own realization where I was like, oh, shit.
Well, and I think that this is an important conversation because, we're talking about being an empath and all these great gifts, and you need to like harness it and master it, and it will do all these magical things for you. But we live in a world of polarity. What exists in one spectrum, equal value also exists on the other side. Everything exists in shadow and light. It is impossible for it not to. We have good cops, bad cops. We have good nurses, bad nurses. We have good life coaches, bad life coaches. And I'm using good and bad just as an idea. We're not trying to say that good and bad exists, but there's a concept we get. Right. And so when we're talking about the light side of being an empath, we have to understand that we can lead a very sheltered life without having intimacy because we have created that version of existence knowingly or unknowingly.
Yes.
Because we send a bomb of you can't get close. And in that we learn, and it's a part of our survival as well when we're taking in all the emotions. So you will have to go through this as an empath, is the realization that you have put up all of these barriers and these boundaries and these walls to protect yourself from getting the emotions in, but you're also protecting yourself from actually letting other people feel you or see you as well.
Yep, 100%. And you'll do it over and over and over again. And some people you'll come across, you'll be like, oh, that's a thing I'm doing again. Even though I thought I worked on this 85 people ago, here it is. Perfect. They've just triggered this. Like, the work is never done.
It's like, boom. And I
Yeah.
always say, like, so we talked about boundaries as an empath being really, really important as well, like creating these boundaries that you're for yourself, especially because we're overgivers and we will do, because we're not all bad. It sounds like we're such bitches. Good luck getting to know us.
Yeah.
But there's a certain capacity where it is, it's a, to me, it's an honor when somebody can get to that level of, getting through the candy cane forest and through the chocolate lake to, I'm using candy because I'm hungry,
Yeah.
get to that side where they can feel us. We
Yeah.
allow them to fully feel us, because feelings to me are, they're a currency. It's not just a word.
Yeah. I agree. I
And
totally agree.
I think that that's a term I've never really realized, right? Like, you're going to offer me this, I'm going to receive the sadness with you, and I'm going to offer you back an amplification of something different. That's a exchange of emotion
Yeah. Yeah.
at a deeper level.
Um, I didn't answer your question. I derailed your question of what are the misconceptions of empaths. I did not forget it.
God, because I did. I
Yeah,
knew there was something I wanted to go back to, but
I just wanted to derail. Just bring it back. I'm going to take us way off track. We're going to go like a whole different direction, but I'll slowly guide us back.
all right.
So I think some of the misconceptions of empaths are, well, I think one of them is that they are only receivers of emotion, not projectors of emotion. Um, and at least in my experience and your experience, that is definitely not true. They're not only receivers of emotion. And again, I'm sure there are some versions of empaths that, project very differently or not at all, but there that exists for sure. Um, I think so. One of the things that I have heard is, how do you handle feeling everyone else's emotions? And I think the misconception for me inside of that is that, um I'm trying to think of how to word this so it makes sense, is that you can't learn to control it or learn to work with it or learn to use it to your benefit. Right? So I think,
Almost like it's a burden.
yeah. Yeah, exactly. Like there's that misconception like, "Oh, that sounds exhausting." Yeah, sure it can be, and it doesn't have to be.
Mhm.
Um I think the other thing is that, and this might just be a me thing. I'm not saying this is empaths across the board. I don't want to speak without for everyone, but I think all feelings are perfect. I do not think that we have good and bad feelings. I think we have feelings that give us information, and the ones that we have deemed bad or hard or whatever it is are just as valuable and important as the ones that we deem fun or that feel good or whatever language we want to use around it. And I think that, um I think there's a lot of misconceptions about how empaths, or like the additional burden of the negative emotions or whatever the case may, like there's,
Because we're having real conversation, I'm going to call it the empath victim or victimization. Like
yeah,
there is a role where an
yeah,
empath plays in the victimhood of the actual gift that it is, right? That it's just, I can't go it's overwhelmed. You don't understand. I'm an empath. This is too
yeah,
hard. This is
yeah,
overwhelmed. Like all that kind of stuff.
yep, yeah. And listen, there are people that do that, for sure, but there's always going to be people that, so interestingly, I think another misconception that what you just said made me realize, and I actually wasn't going to say this. I think there's a misconception that empaths, at least among some people, that empaths are doing it for attention.
Mm.
Right? Like there's or it's, so it's about them. Being an empath is about me as an empath, not about the situation or the person or whatever the case may be. And I think that often happens when people get triggered or are defensive or whatever the case may be. But I think that exists. I've definitely seen evidence of that over the years, of that misconception.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm trying to think of other ones too, because I'm like, this is like all the fun conversations that I could only have with Celine. Because we can actually have these deeper conversations in a way that I think people will receive them differently because of the neutrality that you and I
Yeah.
can hold in this container, where it's not making things good or bad or wrong or right or anything. These are just, this is just information. This is just data that we're adding into a really profound conversation about something that has so many different layers and has so many different nuances and affects so many different parts of life, right? Like we're talking about it from the level of intimacy and relationship and, love, because it does, it like somebody. So I was saying in episode 1, there's hypervigilance, which is a trauma-based response system of having to know what was going on in your household. Then there's a highly sensitive person who's just, their senses are an overload. So it feels very overwhelming. And then there's an empath who is actually a manipulator of energy. And I'm just gonna use that word in a positive tone.
Yes.
And I'm all three.
Yeah.
I have all three.
Yep.
So like getting into a relationship with me, you got to know there's layers to that. Like it's
Yes.
not just ease and joy and happiness all the time as with any other relationship, but that there is like a nuance of I'm already listening to how you sound when you open the bathroom door. Then I can hear how you sound when you're stepping down the hallway. And I'm placing an idea onto what those sounds and how I need to prepare myself to be in a certain form. And then I get a wash of emotion as you enter the room.
Yep.
Welcome.
Yeah.
To this world.
I love that you have that awareness and you share it so openly, because I think that people are, and often empaths will hang on to the one identity of an empath because it feels good compared to other things, and they will ignore trauma, or they will ignore other pieces of who they are that are just as important, and use the empath piece to justify or explain when it's not the justification or explanation for a lot of things, right? So as an example, I'm not hyper vigilant, but I disconnect, which is such a funny thing as an impact, as an empath, because I can do it extraordinarily well, and I recognize it comes from that. I disconnect, so I can step into the world of complete ignoring, complete disconnection, in order to not get sucked into things, in order to not to you know
Protect.
there pardon me.
Protect.
Yeah, it's a protection. And there's a word I'm looking for that I'm forgetting right now. And that comes from, um, just having my mother was a wonderful human and she was wildly unpredictable. So rather than spending years swept in her emotions and swept in her ups and downs, at a certain point, it was like, oh, instead of being, it's like the opposite of, oh my gosh, what is that? What is that? The thing? Oh wow, my brain is so fried right now. Um,
Metronome?
Codependency. So it's like the opposite of codependency.
Not
No,
metronome. Well,
not
that's a big difference.
yeah. So it's like the extreme opposite of codependency is to be extremely independent. And I have a tendency to be extremely independent, and that is my one of my protection mechanisms, that being an empath, I can amplify that, I can exacerbate that, I can like really get into it very easily, and they can play off each other, but they're two distinct parts of the whole of who I am that work together in particular ways. And I think it's important to talk about that, because it's not just one piece of identity or one piece of the puzzle.
It's so true. And I think about that too. I think one of my protections as well is to isolate, and isolate others, because then I just shut down. So if you can imagine being an empath and being able to warm a room or send a vibrational frequency out and create an emotional state of being in an earlier episode, I talk about how when I worked in a gym and I was in a bad mood, my boss took me aside and was like, can you work on your mood? Because when you're in a good mood, the whole gym is in a good mood. And when you're in a bad mood, the whole gym is in a bad mood. And I didn't understand at the time that
Yep.
was
Yep.
was happening. But in that term of when people are so used to being in whatever frequency you're placing out, and then you go like, you shut down and you go,
Yep.
and then people don't feel you at all.
Yes.
And then they think something's terribly wrong. They've done something terribly wrong. And then they feel isolated outside of you. Like they have been kicked out of your love or done something wrong.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So I'm going to just do a quick 180 here.
Do it.
And because I could talk to you forever about all these different things. And I know that this is probably one of the most fascinating episodes for me because we are sharing, again, the dark side of being an empath, because it does exist, is that once we get to a place of awareness and we can actually utilize it and understand that we are placing it out and, I think when you are at that point, like you had said, in your mid-20s, and you create your own value system and your own belief system for yourself, like, I don't want to be a liar. I don't want to be a this. And you know what I mean? That's a self choice.
Absolutely.
Right? We get to a place now where I know that being an empath makes me a great speaker on stage.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So I would love to hear how you use it in business now to actually support the work that you're doing.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think I do a lot of speaking and training, and it's one of the reasons that I am good at that for sure. It's a big piece of it, because I can adjust in it's really been the past year with not doing stuff with like live audiences has been really interesting. And I've definitely found a way to make it work. But in the room, I can very easily and quickly adapt to waves of things I'm feeling that are going to land more effectively in that moment, whether it's a better story, whether it's a tweak of something where it's like, oh, this is going to be the thing. And then it's the thing that stands out to people and they walk away with, right? So definitely that is a huge piece of it. That is a huge benefit to being an empath. A few of the ways that I use it in work specifically is really what you're curious about, right? Like, how do I use it to my benefit in work?
Being an empath in business, I think this is the powerful.
It definitely. So it has always made me a better coach than I probably should have been at the stage of experience that I had. Because it was like I had a secret window into people in those moments. And so I have definitely used that to build my clientele and to build the types of people and number of people and the relationships. I have really strong and long coaching relationships, right? Like, they are people, not because I make them keep coaching with me, because it's going to sound that way, but there are literally like they're working with me because they want to work with me. I swear it's the truth. But like, I have people who have been coaching with me consistently for 6 years, which is a really long time for someone to coach with the same person for 6 years. And I, on a regular basis, I'm like, would you like, are you sure you want to keep doing this still? Not because it's not fun for me, because it's super fun for me when I know someone that well. It's like even more interesting in some ways, but I want it to be beneficial for them. And part of the reason, even ones who've gone and worked with other people, that they come back, that the empath makes me a really good coach because I can see things that they're not seeing. So I've definitely used that to my benefit in business. I have also used it to help design, like, to really help design. So there's two things I would say. When it comes to designing culture, it has helped me fit the culture to the organization, big or small, because that awareness of what is really going on and what's not being said has helped me create things with the companies that I've worked with and the teams that I've worked with that worked for them in ways that was surprising to them. And so, again, I can't explain to them necessarily. And one of the things that I do now with bigger companies is I'll be like, hey, we need to do a survey or have conversations and check these things that I think are happening. And then as soon as we do that and they always turn out to be right, and that's not an ego thing, it's just my intuition is really good for this stuff, then we end up doing the project the way that I thought was going to be the way anyways, except now they have evidence, right? So I've definitely, that has been a big piece of it, as well. And then the other thing I would say, and that's been a huge, because I've done some culture design work with some really cool places, and that's been a game changer because I'm not going in saying, here's the one structure that I use that you need to fit into. Even if I'm like, here's the structure I have in the moment, I'll be like, yeah, no, that's not going to work. We're going to do it this way. And this is why. And it always lands. Like I follow it in the moment with what I'm picking up on. And the last thing I would add is that, and this is, like I said, really new for this year, is working with teams and using it in terms of coaching individuals and teams is a game changer because we're not stuck talking about the obvious thing that they all come with when they're in a protection mode. It actually helps me without calling them out in ways that make them uncomfortable. It helps me get to the real conversation, whether it's individually or in that group setting. And so the conversations there are so much more meaningful and so much more profound. And it helps the leaders who are leading pieces of it show up better because I can be like, hey, you should try doing this, or here's a thing that I'm sensing or feeling, here's a theme that I'm seeing in people. And then they go and do it and they're like, huh.
For those who cannot actually see Celine, I like that when you're doing it, you're doing this eye thing. Like
Yeah, yeah.
I have this like feeling or this sense.
Yeah.
But I just want to say, like, I can feel obviously the significance of that from a management standpoint to be like, we're trying all these things and nothing seems to be working because they can't understand the vibrational tone or emotional state of everybody else around them. And they're doing what the perceived checkbox of like, if you do these things, you will have company culture. And
Yep.
of course it's not going to work if they can't feel how the team or their employees or their coworkers are actually experiencing that. And so that is very powerful. I liked feeling that. Thank you. I love when people talk about their stardust. I say that, like I love when people are in their element because I'm always like, oh, that's my addiction. That's
Yeah.
my personal addiction. When
Yeah.
people are sharing their essence and their mission in that vibration frequency, I'm like, no.
Yeah.
How do I tap into a vein and live on that?
Yeah.
That's so good.
This is why I love working with people and helping them like fully realize who they are. Because that moment where they're like, oh,
Mm.
and then they talk from that place, and I'm like, yeah, you're like a drug. Yes. Let's do that more of that. Yeah.
So if we are manipulating you, it's only to get you to that point. Okay.
Silver lining. Silver lining.
I know. For those who are in companies or that are listening to you and are just like, oh, I love Celine, because like I said, I knew at the very beginning, you have a way of driving through the haze and the confusion to get to straight to the issue and to the point. And they're like, I want that. That's exactly what I need for my company or for myself personally. Where would they go to find you?
They can find me on my website, which should be updated, presumably by the time this comes out. It's don't quote me on that. It's www.revisionary.ca. And yeah, that's probably the easiest way to find me.
What is it that you said that I said I wanted to?
I said I was the bearer of infinite wisdom. Is what
So in our podcast like questionnaire, I think it was like, what do you do for a living, or what is your greatest power?
it was. What do you? I think it is. I think the question is, what would you like to be called? Like, do you have a title you go by, doctor, or? And my title was bearer of infinite wisdom because,
Yeah.
I mean, why not?
Clearly, I would go with Fairy Queen, Queen of the Fae,
Yes.
Priestess of Avalon. What else would I do? There's a few. I would
I feel
definitely
like you need to have witch in there. Like,
I know.
right? Like,
I've been trying to figure this one out because, and so this is, you guys are hearing it live for the first time. I've kind of negotiated the 3 levels of people that I work with, and it's beginner witch, mystic CEO, mystic goddess and priestess CEO. So I can kind of like pull into all of these, but I'm a fairy witch, I'm a chakra witch, I'm a energy witch, I'm a business witch, but I nothing's quite landed on the totality of it all.
Maybe there's an opportunity to not use witch as the noun, but as like part of the descriptor of something else.
And that is how we're going to end today's podcast. If you feel like you can comment on this and support me on what my witchy name would be, please tag me at Avalon Starlight Coaching on all social media, as well as Céline Williams, which is
Revisionary.
Just it?
Underscore Celine. I
Perfect.
think I'm pretty much everything.
Awesome. So tag us on Instagram. We want to know what landed. And if you guys are like, whoa, you guys are intense, then you can also put that.
You're welcome if that's what you're thinking.
We're watching you. No, I'm just kidding. We don't have those capabilities. No, I'm just playing. So I hope you enjoyed this episode. I'm excited to talk a little bit more about this in my solo episode next Monday, just to dive a little deeper and give you guys some feedback on how you can have this awareness of your own energy and how you can go unconscious with anything. And I'm just going to share how going unconscious as an empath affects your life and business. So thanks for tuning in, everybody. Until next time. Wow, that episode was mind-blowing. I hope you had as many ahas listening to it as I had recording it. I would love to see the Rebel Unicorns podcast spread far and wide across the globe, across the universe. So if you want to share it on your social media with something that you found impactful, leave a review, send it to a friend. It would be so deeply appreciated. Also, a little side note, I did recently change my name. I downloaded a year and a half ago that my name was Avalon Starlight. It was previously my birth name was Tamara Arnold. And if you're interested in learning what your Rebel Unicorn house is, oh yeah, there's a quiz for that. Think Harry Potter, except you're sorted into how you are impacting the world with your Stardust and what energy you're here to shift and change. You can find out your Rebel Unicorn house at www.tamaraarnold.ca/quiz. Let me know, tag me in social media, send the quiz out, and join the Rebel Unicorns Facebook group to be in a community of like-minded spiritual entrepreneurs who understand that when you shift your energy, you transform your business.